Morning, many demonstrators who still are not budging are facing arrest. I want to take you to the streets of Ottawa now. CTV's Bergeron-Oliver is joining us. Annie, first of all, describe where you are and what you're seeing.
Hi, Marcia. Well, I'm at the corner of Nicholas and Mackenzie King Bridge. So for people in Ottawa who are familiar, this is right next to the Rideau Centre, a mall that's now been closed for about 3 weeks. And as you can tell behind me, there are a lot of police, both vehicles and officers. They're sort of staging right now. 2 big buses just came in with officers in it. And this is also an area, part of the off-ramp from the 417 that heads into the downtown core. It's been blocked for pretty much the last almost 3 weeks. So we did hear some reports of several arrests this morning. We're just waiting to get some confirmation on that. But as you can tell, quite a large police presence here. We've seen at least 2 ambulances, and there's also 1 armored police vehicle. Now, the other thing that's interesting, Marcia, is that protesters have been warned repeatedly over the last few days that taking part in this convoy is an illegal, unlawful activity. As you can hear, there are a number of different protesters who are here, and just before this interview, I spoke to one of them who was videotaping this and live streaming, and I asked her why she came down. She said for her this is about vaccines and that this is more important, her freedom. She was not concerned about being arrested. So clearly there is some defiance and some determination on the behalf of protesters today.
Annie, describe the mood there after 3 weeks of this, many people frustrated and anxious to get this over. How would you describe the feeling in the air today compared to previous days?
I would definitely say it's a little bit more tense, Marcia. I mean, just on the walk to work, we were stopped probably 3-4 times, different police blockades, checking to make sure individuals were coming into the downtown for various reasons. Most vehicles were stopped. Pedestrians were able to go through, but it was just a much quieter scene. There were not a lot of vehicles around the office, which is right next to Wellington Street. And right here, obviously, it's tense. Mostly the people around me are reporters and security staff as well, just kind of waiting to see what happens. But it's definitely a more intense situation than we have seen over the last few days. Perhaps that's because police have warned repeatedly about imminent action, and the scene that we're seeing now sort of looks like that's exactly what's happening.
Can you describe this perimeter that has now been created around the downtown and how it will even affect members of the media who might be trying to get closer to where the protesters are on Wellington Street?
Well, look, it's still very early, so far we have not had any problems getting in. Even my colleagues who had to drive in this morning didn't have any problem seeing their media. Even here where we are for now anyway, police are saying just as long as you stay behind the police cruiser, we're fine to be here filming. Now, that can always change if the situation gets more tense, but there is this perimeter set up. Police say there are about 100 different checkpoints. As I mentioned, just on my walk to work, 3 or 4 different checkpoints we had to go through. Pedestrians were allowed. Here, there's a checkpoint as well. You can sort of see some people walking through. Police are just asking pedestrians where they're going. If they're going to work or to school, they're able to go through. Otherwise, they're being turned around. We saw the same thing earlier today. So Elgin, anything near the highway, vehicles were being turned around. In fact, they witnessed one that was a truck that had Freedom Convoy 2022 written on it, and the police officer turned the truck around and went back. Now, there is some congestion because of that. The 417, our major highway, a number of the main exits heading into the downtown core are closed, so there's quite a bit of traffic just outside the core. But really, the entire area around Wellington Street, around Nicholas, any of this kind of main downtown core around the Rideau Centre, the canal, is closed off to vehicles, and this is in preparation for what appears to be imminent action by police.
Yeah, and we have been waiting for that for the past couple of days and wondering when it was really going to be go time, if you will. Andy, for those protesters who are taking heed of that warning from police, now that this perimeter has been established, can they still leave? Is there an opportunity now to still leave?
Well, police have said that anybody who wants to leave can leave. They have been adamant that they want this to end peacefully, that they want people to go out of their own free will, that they don't want to have to use force. So police have said repeatedly, if somebody wants to leave, they are able to leave. But we also have to remember that it might not be that easy. A lot of vehicles have run out of gas. In some cases, police have talked about the fact that they've bled their brakes, which means that the vehicle cannot move. It's been rendered immobile. Some of the vehicles have their wheels taken off, and some of the vehicles are also sandwiched between other vehicles that maybe don't want to move. So there's one thing about wanting to move and being able to move. They seem to be different things depending on where you are parked in this convoy.
Annie Bergeron-Oliver, we're going to be in touch with you throughout the morning. Please come back to us if something develops where you are. I want to go now to another political development in Ottawa this morning. The House of Commons saying that they will not be sitting today to debate the Emergency Act brought in by the government to deal with the protests citing police action. CTV's Mike Lecouture is in the Ottawa Bureau. He's got more for us. So, Mike, the House of Commons putting out this notice earlier this morning. Tell us more.
Yeah, and we do have a statement from Mark Holland, who is, of course, the Liberal House Leader, the House Leader of the government in the House of Commons. And basically, I'll just read it to you quickly. It says, we're closely monitoring the police operation in downtown Ottawa today and await further advice from security officials on Parliament Hill on when the House can reopen. We hope that can occur on Saturday. Also keeping in mind that the Senate was supposed to sit today as well to consider the Emergencies Act, to debate it at the same time as the House of Commons is doing it. They have said that their next sitting will be Monday instead. So that sort of falls more into the regular calendar. But obviously everybody taking a very much different posture. I mean, one would have had to guess that maybe that would have been the case for the Senate when the fencing started to go up around the Senate yesterday, nearly 2-meter high fencing that was going around that building early yesterday morning. But clearly there is a different posture. Clearly, the security forces that are on Parliament Hill, who are always looking to ensure that the security of the MPs, staff, and anybody who has to go into the parliamentary precinct, into those buildings, is always put forward and always put at the top of the order here. And clearly they have decided that it is not safe for members of Parliament to go into the House of Commons, and keep an understanding of why. So the layout of Parliament Hill, as we were talking about what Annie was saying, that this sort of hard perimeter red zone is about a 3 square kilometer part of the downtown core. Within that, there are many residences. Within those residences, many MPs. Even the ones that come from out of town have either long-term apartments, they stay in hotels or the such, or they have apartment rentals. So they are free to roam about in that area, but then what they have to do to get to Parliament Hill on most days is cross through the protest. We've seen on a number of occasions some of the MPs have stopped to chat with them, notably former Conservative leader Andrew Scheer, an MP from Saskatchewan. He has stopped, giving them thumbs up, or at least chatted a little bit with them. MPs have also posed for pictures with them on the way out. And so understanding that if a police operation is going to be happening on Wellington Street, obviously the Parliamentary Protective Service, which manages all of the different security on Parliament Hill, would not want to have to manage MPs getting possibly stuck on Parliament Hill like we saw in 2014 when there was a shooting on Parliament Hill, because that was also a logistical nightmare. So clearly feeling that it is best now not to have the House sit today.
Not to have the House sit. And it would be one of those odd split-screen moments if we had them debating in the House of Commons while we're watching police enforcement in full force outside. So, Mike, what does this mean for debate on that bill? Where does that now stand?
It looks like it's delayed one day, and according to that statement from Mark Holland, they're hoping it's delayed just one day and that they can sit tomorrow, but they do have to take their cues from Ottawa Police, and it all depends on what happens outside Parliament. If it becomes safe to now get to Parliament Hill, then it would seem that they will be able to do that. Understanding where we were talking to Annie just a couple of minutes ago, that's kind of on the eastern side of that perimeter. The northern side of the perimeter is Parliament Hill, and then a little further to the west is Bronson. So that's about a kilometer or so away from Parliament Hill to the west. So Parliament Hill is really dead center, right in the middle of where the protests are. And right now, I have no idea what the police plans are. They have not told any of us, obviously, but it looks like they're starting on the east and potentially working their way west. But certainly, to Annie's point earlier, getting some of these trucks out of there and getting to some of these trucks will be the most difficult right on Parliament Hill, right on Wellington Street, I should say, right on the doorstep of our democracy, because some of these trucks have been moved in there. They are so sandwiched together that it will be hard to even navigate through them. It'll be hard to get to the people there. And even if any one of these trucks decides today, you know what, I'm done, I want to get out of here while I still can, and if the police will grant me safe passage, it may be a logistical nightmare to get them out, not just because they're sandwiched in, but because 20 centimeters fell overnight, and trying to get through all of that and sort of move cars around or move vehicles around will be near impossible today.
Michael Couture, thank you very much. The first of many conversations we're going to be having throughout the morning. We'll talk to you again soon. I want to turn now to Mark Mendelson. Mark is a former homicide detective. Mark, good morning to you. So we saw some police activity about an hour and a half ago. We heard from CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver that buses had arrived with police officers inside, and she described the mood on the ground as tense. Some arrests took place again around 8 o'clock Eastern this morning, but since then it's been pretty calm. What's your bird's eye view of what's happening right now?
Well, good morning, Marcia, and I think we're going to probably see a lot more buses coming in over the next couple of hours. I mean, we haven't seen a fraction of the police officers that are in Ottawa now and that are arriving today, including the tactical officers who are part of the public response unit, public order unit, you know, with the shields and the helmets. We haven't seen them yet. The mounted unit is there. Certainly the Toronto Police has sent up a number of horses as well. That's going to be the reactive component to this part of the operation. What we're seeing now is a strong show of uniform presence, a strong show of force, if you will. And they're shortening the sort of the list of people that are hanging around in the area by having these sort of roped off areas, these confined areas that they've now designated. We've seen a couple of people apparently surrendering, and I'm not sure what they're surrendering for. I would imagine that officers told them they had to leave the area, and they refused, and they were very compliant. So let's hope that temperature stays where it is. 2 key people arrested last night. Interestingly enough, they have not been released yet. At least they haven't come out publicly. So I'm assuming they're still in custody, which tells you that they will probably be seeing justices of the peace today and being released if it's practical and if they meet the requirements, with a number of release conditions, bail conditions, Marcia. And these are going to be very interesting to see, you know, because they could be actually excluded from the entire city of Ottawa. You know, in terms of a bail condition, rather than saying 500 meters or 1,000 meters from Parliament Hill, it could be the entire city. That's not unusual. Cell phone activity, social media activity, all could be wrapped up into their release conditions. And of course, if they breach those, Marcia, you know, whatever those conditions are, then they're charged with the second offense of breaching, you know, their recognizance, a serious offense. So, you know, the protesters are watching what's going on. They're seeing the police. The police right now are being low key. This is their opportunity to leave without any problems at all. But the message has been sent. It's been sent loud and clear. And that's the proactive part. But Marcia, the reactive part will be as to how the protesters behave. They're, you know, what they do in the next couple of hours. Do they hunker down? Do they start throwing things? Do they start obstructing people in other areas? It's all going to have to be reactive. But rest assured, Marcia, there were a lot more police that we haven't even seen yet.
Do you think the plan is to arrest people, then move out vehicles?
I think the plan is to get people out of there as peacefully and as quietly as possible, and to give these individuals every opportunity to leave on their own accord as opposed to being arrested. Having said that, make no mistake, the police are quite prepared to arrest how many people. It doesn't matter. It matters not to the police. But, you know, the easy way is always leave, go away. And if you're out of the area now, certainly don't come to the downtown Ottawa area. I mean, we're coming up to the weekend. We're coming up to a long weekend. They're concerned about kids. They're concerned about people trying to find different routes to make their way into the downtown core. Let's be clear. This is no place for children, none whatsoever, because we have no control as individuals, or as a police force, or as protesters, as to what's going to happen. Are people going to start throwing things? And as soon as we get one small child hit by an object, that changes everybody's you know, view of what's taking place here. So the best thing is to stay away. If you've got kids there, get the kids out. I mean, Children's Aid is there to help, but they really don't want to get involved either. It's not safe for children. And it's not safe for anybody else right now who just wants to come as an observer, Marcia.
Okay.
They can watch it on TV.
Yeah. And I want to ask you lastly about safety, and I know that you're going to be with us throughout our coverage this morning, but I do want to ask you right now about the risk factor. There is obviously an element of danger. I'm wondering if after 3 weeks there has to be presumably some familiarity with the protesters there. The officers likely know them, but how dangerous is this operation going to be today? What sort of intelligence would they have about, again, potential weapons, people acting out, not knowing what's inside those trucks? How great is the risk today?
Well, that is a risk. There's no question about it. And we saw in Western Canada what happened just a couple of days ago with a cache of weapons being located. So the police are alive to this. They've had 3 weeks and change to identify the players and the agitators and the onlookers and the hangers-ons and all those people. So they understand where they all fit into this mix of a demonstration. And hopefully the intelligence is good in terms of weapons. And it doesn't have to be firearms. It could be tire irons and baseball bats and things of that nature, pepper spray, bear spray. We don't know what information the police have, but I can assure you, priority number one is the safety of the officers, of the people who are demonstrating, and of the residents of Ottawa. And if the police are concerned about a particular vehicle, whether it has explosives or what have you, I can assure you that the dogs are up there as well, and they can do the locating too. They're prepared now. They've had a lot of time to prepare for every contingency, including the weather, which really shouldn't hamper anything today at all, other than it being really cold. So you're right. There are all kinds of things that we don't know, but that the police may know. And I think it's important that we just let this process play out over the next 12 hours or 14 hours, and hopefully this is all completely gone by Monday.
Mark Mendelson, thank you so much. Mark, we know you're on standby. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again soon. So the first round of arrests were targeted, and they included 2 of the Convoy organizers. They were taken into custody Thursday and now facing a number of charges. So Saskatchewan trucker Chris Barber is charged with counseling to commit the offense of mischief, counseling to commit the offense of disobeying a court order, and counseling to commit the offense of obstructing police. Fellow organizer Tamara Leach of Alberta is also charged with counseling to commit the offense of mischief. Both are scheduled to appear in court today. To explain these charges in further detail, I'm joined by Ari Goldkind. He's a legal analyst. So how serious are these charges? Can you walk us through what they mean to the layman?
Marcia, it's a great question about how serious these charges are. These are not terrorism charges. We've seen that word being invoked. We've heard people using all sorts of terms. These are extraordinarily simple charges. The one charge that stands out as the most serious is counseling to disobey a court order. You saw that as the second charge for the gentleman. The mischief charges, people hear that word, and if you don't know what that word means, it's essentially being used here to interfere with property and the ordinary use and enjoyment of people's property in the downtown Ottawa area. Normally, those would be very unserious, non-serious charges. Mischief is, to a criminal defense lawyer, often a very light charge. But when you look at it in the context of this morning and what we're about to see over the next 12 to 24, 36, 48 hours, that takes on a different complexity. The disobey court order really gets into a very strong message that a judge or a justice of the peace will take a good look at, because that's really a crime allegedly against the administration of justice. That may be treated more seriously than the mischief, having a truck there, encouraging somebody to give a fake name, encouraging people to blockade. The really interesting question this morning that I think we'll only learn about after the 10 o'clock hour, there's 2 questions. One, will the Crown consent to their release? We're not talking 2 Paul Bernardos here. In the normal course, they would have already been released from the police station on paper, to use that vernacular. But come 10 o'clock, once a Crown attorney, literally a Crown attorney, looks at their files, will they be released on consent, or will they have to sing for their supper? The second question, and again, raises all sorts of interesting issues here, Marcia, is if they're released on consent, or if they're told, look, don't come back to the downtown area, don't come back to Ottawa, don't do this or don't do that, Will the two people we're speaking of this morning, and including others who I expect to be arrested in the next couple hours, will they actually abide or agree to sign those bail papers? That's a really live question, given their conscience and that they feel what they're doing is right.
Could they face more charges?
So this morning, they're not going to face more charges. The Ottawa police put out two very clear press releases. And by the way, the communications from Ottawa, how they've changed in the last 1 or 2 days, given the whole hullabaloo of the board, the police chief, the communications from Ottawa police have been outstanding. The charges are not going to be increased this morning. Where these two people really face extraordinary risk, because leave aside the Emergencies Act, leave aside criticism of that, leave aside criticism of banking, FinTrack, GoFundMe. These are straightforward criminal charges. They're not all that serious in the grand picture. But if they go out and they sign a bail paper that they're not going to do X and Y, but they go right back out, and in 3-4 hours, your cameras in the live feed pick them up doing X and Y if they're released, that's when they start looking at very serious jail time, believe it or not.
If we see a slew of people arrested today, Ari, and charged, they're going to say that they have absolutely every right under the Charter to protest. What is their defense?
So that's a great question, because this gets into people's particular politics. Are you on Trudeau's side, or are you the 60% who didn't vote for him? So there's a political component to this, and this is something that will be litigated as time goes on. Let's make this very clear. The charges that they face now are very straightforward criminal charges, Marcia. They are not complex. They're not freedom of assembly. They are mischief, interfere with property, essentially, and counseling to commit obstruct, essentially, for the gentleman. The one lady has the counseling to commit mischief. There could be, and I would expect their lawyers to bring what are called constitutional challenges should these matters end up in court. Look, these things may get resolved over the next 2, 3, 6 months. They may never see the light of day of a trial, but I have a suspicion, and I do believe this as a criminal defense lawyer, they have strong constitutional arguments to what they did, but the Crown, the state may say, look, what you've done crossed the line. This was not protest. This was obstruction. And on those allegations, their defense may not be as strong as the constitutional arguments we're all talking about today when it comes to the Emergencies Act, Parliament not debating, all these other political issues that I think are a little bit distinct from the charges these two people face.
Okay, Ari Goldkind. Oh, upstairs, can you? Thank you. Yeah. Ari Goldkind, thank you so much. As always, really appreciate it.